Old houses hold memories of years gone by. My house at 23 Birch Street is no exception. Every creaky floorboard, every crack in the ceiling is a silent witness to 73 years of my life. I, Oliver Quincy, have lived here most of my days, and these walls know me better than anyone alive today. Wednesday morning began as usual. A cup of strong black coffee, toast with jam, and the Wharton Daily newspaper. My hands, once steady and firm, now often trembled, especially in the mornings. It was an occupational hazard. Years of working with formaldehyde and other chemicals take their toll. I looked at my reflection in the window pane. A thin, wrinkled face with piercing gray eyes and unsmiling mouth. Sparse gray hair. The face of a man who had seen too much death. 36 years as a pathologist at Wharton County Hospital meant thousands of autopsies. Thousands of stories read from dead bodies. Many considered me a gloomy, cynical old man. They were probably right. But in my profession, excessive sentimentality is a flaw. I'm used to telling the truth, no matter how unpleasant it may be. It was this trait that always caused tension in my relationship with my son, Eden. The thought of him filled me with the familiar bitterness. My only son grew up to be ambitious and determined. We are alike in that respect. But that's where the similarity ends. Somewhere along the way, he lost something important: his conscience, his compassion, his principles. Then again, maybe he never had them to begin with. I remembered our last big fight, 10 years ago, when he was just starting out at Nexron Pharmaceuticals. At the time, I was performing an autopsy on a young man who had died of liver failure after taking an experimental drug. This is a side effect that your company was well aware of, but chose to keep quiet about, I said to Eden over a family dinner. You don't understand how the industry works, Dad, he replied coldly. Every drug has risks. You can't stop progress because of isolated cases. Isolated? This was the 22nd case in 6 months, and that's just in our district. Statistical error, Eden shrugged. The drug helps thousands. What about the oath to do no harm? I'm not a doctor, Dad. I'm a lobbyist. My job is to promote the company's interests. After that argument, we saw each other less and less, especially after the death of Evelyn, my wife and his mother. She was a buffer between us, smoothing out the rough edges. Without her, the gap only widened. Returning my thoughts to the present, I finished my cold coffee. The house was quiet, only the old wall clock ticking away the time. Every day is like the one before. Morning ritual, reading, a walk to the park, sometimes a game of chess with old men like me, a measured life in retirement. The only bright spot in this monotonous routine was Hazel, my granddaughter. A smart, principled girl, so unlike her father. 21 years old, a student in the criminology department. She often came to visit me, brought me home-cooked meals, and told me about her studies. Sometimes she asked for help with her studies, especially when it came to pathological anatomy. Grandpa, no one explains the signs of asphyxia as clearly as you do, she laughed during our last meeting 2 weeks ago. I smiled, remembering her lively brown eyes, her chestnut hair tied back in a casual bun, her habit of wrinkling her nose when she was thinking hard. Hazel resembled her grandmother not only in appearance, but also in character. The same passion for justice, the same stubbornness. A phone call interrupted my thoughts. The old-fashioned landline rang insistently. I rarely receive calls, especially at such an early hour. Oliver Quincy speaking. Mr. Quincy, this is Detective Foster from the Wharton Police Department, a low male voice said on the other end of the line. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Something tightened inside me. Over the years, I had learned to recognize a certain tone, the tone used to deliver news of death. I'm listening, I said, my own voice sounding detached, as if it belonged to someone else. It's about your granddaughter, Hazel Quincy. I'm very sorry, but she was found dead in her apartment this morning. Time stood still. The world narrowed down to that sentence, to the voice on the phone. What happened? I asked mechanically, as if on autopilot. The preliminary cause of death is a drug overdose. Her roommate discovered the body and called the police. We need someone from her immediate family to identify the body. Your son has already been notified, but... Overdose? I interrupted him, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. This is some kind of mistake. Hazel didn't do drugs. Sir, I understand how you feel, But there is irrefutable evidence at the scene. A syringe, injection marks, powder, presumably heroin. I said it's a mistake, I said, my voice turning icy. My granddaughter was a sensible person. She was studying criminology, for God's sake. She knew better than most about the dangers of drugs. Mr. Quincy, unfortunately, sometimes we don't know our loved ones as well as we think we do. His voice sounded with professional sympathy, honed by years of similar conversations. In any case, a full investigation will be conducted. The autopsy is scheduled for tomorrow. Please come to the county hospital morgue for identification. I hung up without saying goodbye. Thoughts raced chaotically through my head. This must be some kind of ridiculous mistake. Hazel couldn't have died of an overdose. Not her. I stood up, feeling weak in my legs. I had to pull myself together and get to the morgue. I had to see what had happened with my own eyes. My professional habit of not believing words, of trusting only facts, suddenly became my personal salvation. As I got dressed, I thought about my last conversation with Hazel. She seemed excited, focused on some project. Grandpa, I think I found something serious, but I need to gather more information before I can tell you. There was no indication of drug problems, not a single sign. The taxi arrived in 15 minutes. All the way to the hospital, I stared out the window, not really seeing anything. Wharton is a small town in the Northeast where everyone knows each other. The morning streets were almost empty, with the occasional passer-by hurrying about their business. It was a typical Wednesday morning. For them, the world hadn't turned upside down. The Wharton General Hospital is a massive red brick building constructed in the 1940s. I had worked there most of my life and knew every corridor and every door. The morgue was in the basement, a typical location for such facilities. As I descended the familiar staircase, I felt my throat tighten. How many times had I met the relatives of the deceased here, offering my restrained condolences? Now I was on the other side. Detective Foster, a tall man in his 40s with a tired face, stood at the entrance to the morgue. Next to him was my son, Eden. He was fit, wearing an expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled. His face expressed grief, but his eyes remained cold. Father, he nodded reservedly. Eden, I replied with a nod of my own. Even at a moment like this, we couldn't find words of support for each other. Next to my son stood his new wife, Tamsin, a striking blonde in her mid-30s with flawless makeup and a gaze that assessed everything around her from a position of value. This was Eden's third marriage in the last 15 years. I had seen her only a couple of times at family gatherings, where she had been aloof and arrogant. Mr. Quincy, Foster nodded at me, please come inside. Dr. Reed is waiting for us. Dr. Reed was a young pathologist who had replaced me after I retired. He was a capable guy, but he lacked experience. I had consulted with him several times on difficult cases. Inside, it smelled of formaldehyde and disinfectants, a smell that had become ingrained in my skin, my clothes, my life. Cold fluorescent lighting, tiled walls, metal tables, a familiar setting that now seemed like a nightmare. On one of the tables lay a body covered with a sheet. Reed stood nearby, holding a clipboard with papers. His face showed his discomfort. Not surprising, considering he was about to show the body to a former colleague. Oliver, I'm so sorry, he said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. Eden and Tamsin stood a little way off, her hand clasped in his in feigned support. Reed carefully pulled back the sheet, revealing her face. Hazel looked as if she were asleep. Pale skin, closed eyes, a peaceful expression. No external injuries. I looked at her with a professional eye, noting the signs of rigor mortis, the slight cyanosis of her lips. And at the same time, I couldn't shake the thought that this was my little granddaughter, who once sat on my lap and asked me to tell her scary stories from the morgue. Yes, it's Hazel, Eden confirmed behind me. His voice trembled, betraying real emotion for the first time. I couldn't take my eyes off her face. Something bothered me. Something didn't add up. The toxicology results won't be back until tomorrow, Reed said, but the preliminary conclusion is a heroin overdose. There are injection marks on her left arm, and opiates were found in her blood. Her roommate claims that Hazel had been acting strangely lately, nervous and secretive. That's impossible, I finally found my voice. Hazel didn't use drugs. Never. Mr. Quincy, Foster interjected, we found heroin in her apartment. Syringes, other paraphernalia, everything points to regular use. I don't believe it, I said firmly. Someone planted those things. Someone wanted her death to look like that. Eden sighed in exasperation. Dad, please, don't turn this into one of your detective stories. Hazel was under pressure, school, working on her thesis. Maybe she was looking for a way to relax and cross the line. No, I turned to him. You didn't know your daughter at all if you think she would have touched drugs. She saw too many overdose deaths during her internship. She was smarter than that. I think we all need time to accept what happened, Reed said gently. Shock can manifest in different ways, including denial. I'm not in shock or denial. My voice turned icy. I demand the most thorough investigation, full toxicology, analysis of all tissues, examination of all possible causes of death. Of course, Reed nodded. Everything will be done according to protocol. We need to discuss the funeral, Tamsin said unexpectedly. Her voice sounded inappropriately businesslike. Iden and I have to fly to Europe in 3 days. It's an important business trip that can't be postponed. I stared at her, not believing my ears. Your daughter died, Eden, and you're going to fly out? Eden looked embarrassed but stood his ground. This is a really critical meeting, Dad. We're talking about millions of dollars in investment for the company. We'll arrange the funeral for the day after tomorrow, and I didn't listen to the rest, turning away to look at Hazel's body. My family. My toxic, heartless family. I looked at the face of my granddaughter, the only person who still connected me to this world, and felt a growing certainty inside me. Whatever the toxicology report showed, whatever the witnesses said, Hazel did not die of an overdose. She was murdered, and I would find out who did it. I gently touched her cold hand, mentally promising to find the truth. Oliver Quincy, 73 years old, may not be the sharp pathologist he once was, but I know death better than anyone in this city, and I will find out what really happened to my granddaughter, even if it means going against my own son. The morgue at Weirton County Hospital hadn't changed in the years I'd been away. The same gray walls, the same smell of formaldehyde and disinfectant, the same dim fluorescent lighting. Only now Dr. Reed had taken my place, and I was an outsider. After officially identifying Hazel's body, I couldn't just go home and wait for the funeral. Something was bothering me. Some kind of professional intuition developed over years of working with the dead. I waited until Eden and Tamsin left, then headed for Reed's office. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. Nurses, orderlies, and doctors passed by. Many recognized me, nodded, and offered their condolences. News travels fast in a small town, especially bad news. The door to Reed's office was ajar. He was sitting at his desk, filling out some paperwork. Hearing my footsteps, he looked up. His gaze conveyed sympathy and a certain amount of concern. Oliver? I thought you left already. I need to see the autopsy report, James, I said without preamble. Reed rubbed his neck nervously. He was young, just over 40, with graying temples and the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much death. You know I can't do that. It's against protocol. To hell with protocol, I said, sinking into the chair opposite him. This is my granddaughter we're talking about, and I'm not just a relative. I'm your colleague. They were 36 years old. Former colleague, he corrected gently. Oliver, I understand how you feel, but the rules... James, I leaned forward. Remember the Murray case? 2010, arsenic poisoning. Everyone blamed it on heart failure, but I found traces in her hair and fingernails. You were an intern at the time, and I made you a co-author on the article for the Journal of Forensic Medicine. He sighed, admitting defeat. Of course I remember. That article helped me get this job. But now it's a different situation. You're too personally involved. That's exactly why I need your professional opinion, I insisted. Something doesn't add up in this story, James. Hazel didn't use drugs. Ever. I want to see everything. The report, the photos, the toxicology. When it's ready. Reed was silent for a few seconds, then nodded and opened his desk drawer. He took out a folder with the report. You've always been stubborn, Oliver. I'll show you the preliminary results, but on one condition, you won't interfere with the official investigation. I nodded, although we both knew that I had no intention of keeping that promise. The report was standard. Female, 21 years old, in good physical condition, no chronic illnesses. Preliminary cause of death, acute opioid intoxication, Injection marks on her left arm. Time of death, between 9 p.m. and midnight the previous day. I studied the photos of the body carefully. Nothing unusual. Typical signs of an overdose. Cyanosis, dilated pupils, traces of vomiting. But something caught my attention. "What's that?" I pointed to a barely noticeable bruise on Hazel's neck, partially hidden by her hair. Reed leaned over the photo. "Probably a post-mortem bruise from improper transport of the body." "And this?" I turned the page, pointing to small red dots in the whites of her eyes. "Petechiae?" "Yes, they often accompany an overdose due to hypoxia," Reed replied, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "James, these signs are also characteristic of asphyxia," I said quietly. "A strange combination for a pure heroin overdose, don't you think?" Reed frowned. "You're not suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," I interrupted him, "just pointing out inconsistencies. By the way, the injection mark, you said it was on her left arm?" "Yes, in the crook of her elbow. A classic spot for intravenous injections among drug addicts." "Hazel was right-handed," I pointed out. "If she had injected herself, it would be more logical to assume that the mark would be on her right arm." "Oliver," Reed looked concerned, "many people inject into their left arm, even if they are right-handed. It's not unusual, and toxicology will probably confirm the presence of heroin in her blood." I closed the folder and handed it back to Reed. "When will the full results be ready?" "By tomorrow morning." "But Oliver, please don't build conspiracy theories based on normal post-mortem changes. It will only complicate the grieving process." I stood up, feeling my old knees ache. "Thank you, James. I appreciate your help." "One more thing," he added. "The police found a diary in Hazel's apartment. In her last entries, she mentions problems with sleep and anxiety. Perhaps she was looking for a way to self-medicate." I shook my head. "Hazel would have seen a doctor if she had such problems. She was a sensible girl." "People don't always act sensibly," Reed replied gently, "especially young people under pressure." I didn't argue. It's useless to try to convince someone who believes the official version. I needed to see Hazel's apartment, talk to her neighbor, find that diary. But first, one more visit. The anatomy room was one floor below. There on the table lay my granddaughter's body, prepared for burial. I knew the body would be sent to the funeral home in a few hours, and this was my last chance to see it with a professional eye. Technically, I wasn't allowed to be there without being accompanied by staff, but 36 years of working in this building had given me knowledge of all the codes and procedures. My old past still worked on some of the doors. Typical negligence of a provincial hospital. Hazel's body was covered with a sheet. I carefully pulled back the fabric, trying to maintain professional detachment. "This is not my granddaughter," I told myself. "This is a subject of investigation, evidence in a possible crime." I put on gloves and began my examination. The bruise on her neck that I had noticed in the photograph was more distinct in direct light. It was small but had a distinctive shape, resembling a finger mark. I carefully turned her head and found another faint mark on the opposite side. The injection mark on the crook of his elbow looked strangely clean. A single, neat puncture, without the characteristic marks of multiple injections that are usually found in regular heroin users. I examined his nails, hair, and skin, looking for the slightest signs of a struggle or resistance. Nothing obvious, but the overall picture raised more and more questions. The sound of the door opening made me freeze. A nurse entered the room, an elderly woman who had worked here when I was still there. "Dr. Quincy?" She recognized me. "You're not allowed to be here." "I know, Martha." I pulled the sheet back over the body. "I just wanted to say goodbye." Her face softened. "I'm very sorry for your loss, but if Dr. Reed finds out—" "He won't." I took off my gloves. "I'm leaving now." "Thank you for your understanding." Leaving the hospital, I paused on the steps, breathing in the fresh spring air. Fragments of thoughts, facts, inconsistencies swirled in my head. Something told me that Hazel's death was not an accident or the result of drug addiction. But I had no proof, only the suspicions of an old pathologist who refused to believe that his beloved granddaughter had died of an overdose. The next 2 days passed in a blur. The funeral arrangements fell on my shoulders. Eden was too busy preparing for the trip. I chose the coffin, the flowers, the cemetery plot. It was like a bad dream. The full toxicology results confirmed the presence of heroin in Hazel's blood. Dr. Reed called me to give me the official conclusion. Death was caused by acute opioid intoxication, classified as an accident. Case closed. But for me, it was just beginning. The day of the funeral was cloudy but dry. The small chapel at the cemetery was half full. Hazel's friends from university, a few of Eden's colleagues, neighbors. Eden himself looked impeccable in a black suit, his face a measured expression of grief. Tamsin stood nearby, wearing an elegant black dress and sunglasses, despite the absence of sun. "We'll have to leave right after the ceremony," Eden whispered to me before the service began. "The flight is at 6 in the evening. We have to get to the airport." I didn't answer. Words were useless. I had lost my son long ago, long before Hazel's death. Now there was a real gulf between us. The priest spoke the standard words about a young life cut short, about God's providence and the comfort of faith. Meaningless phrases for a man who had spent his life cutting open corpses and seeing death for what it is. Meaningless and final. During the service, I looked around at the people present. Most of the faces were unfamiliar to me. Young people, Hazel's peers. Some were crying, others sat with stony faces. In the back row, I noticed a girl who caught my attention. She was thin, with short red hair, wearing a black sweater that was out of season. She wasn't crying, but her face showed tension, almost fear. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away. Something about her seemed familiar. After the service, when the coffin was carried out of the chapel, I tried to find the girl, but she seemed to have disappeared among the other mourners. The procession moved toward the burial site. Heavy clouds covered the sky, as if nature itself was mourning the loss. The coffin was lowered into the ground. Eden threw a symbolic handful of dirt, hugged me mechanically and muttered something about support and connection. Then he and Tamsin quickly left, rushing to catch their flight to their important meeting. I remained alone at the grave of my son's daughter, feeling a strange emptiness. People gradually dispersed. Some approached me, offered their condolences, offered help. I nodded, thanked them, not remembering faces or names. My thoughts were occupied with that bruise on her neck, that strangely clean injection mark, the anxiety Hazel had felt during our last conversation. When almost everyone had left, I noticed her again, the red-haired girl in the black sweater. She was standing in the distance under an old oak tree, looking in my direction. This time our eyes met, and she didn't look away. I moved toward her, crossing the distance between the gravestones. She didn't run away, although her posture showed that she had considered it. "Did you know Hazel?" I asked as I got closer. The girl nodded. Her eyes were red from crying, but dry. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept for days. "I'm Freya. We went to school together." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You're her grandfather, aren't you? She talked about you a lot." "Yes," I said, looking closely at her face, trying to understand what was causing my unease. "Hazel never mentioned you." That wasn't true. Hazel had talked about a friend named Freya. They were working on a project together. But I wanted to test the girl's reaction. "We've only become close recently," she replied, nervously twisting the sleeve of her sweater. "Because we work together in the lab." "Are you studying forensics too?" "Pharmacology," she corrected. "We had an interdisciplinary project." I nodded, making a mental note. Something in her behavior suggested fear, but not the normal fear one feels when talking to a stranger. It was a deeper fear, almost panic. "Freya," I lowered my voice, "do you know anything about Hazel's problems?" "What problems?" Her eyes widened. "The police think she was using drugs." Freya shook her head with such conviction that it couldn't be an act. "That's absurd. Hazel would never touch drugs. Never." "I agree, but all the evidence points to an overdose." Freya looked around as if checking to see if anyone was listening to our conversation. "I have to go. I'm sorry." She turned abruptly and walked quickly toward the cemetery exit. I wanted to follow her, but my old legs wouldn't have allowed me to catch up with the young woman. Instead, I memorized her appearance and decided that I would definitely find a way to talk to her again. Freya knew something that made her afraid. I was left alone at Hazel's grave. The cemetery workers waited nearby to finish the burial. I placed a white rose, Hazel's favorite flower, on the mound of earth and made a silent promise. I would find the truth whatever it took. I would find out what really happened to my granddaughter. Because one thing I knew for sure, The overdose story was a lie, and someone was working hard to make that lie look like the truth. After the funeral, I returned to my empty house on Birch Street. The silence weighed heavily on my ears, reminding me that I was now completely alone. With Hazel gone, the last thread connecting me to my family had been severed. Eden and Tamsin were already on their way to Europe, having flown out immediately after the ceremony. I mechanically made tea, not tasting a thing. Fragments of thoughts swirled in my head about the oddities I had noticed when examining the body, about the nervous Freya, about Hazel's last words about some important discovery. It all added up to a disturbing picture, but I couldn't find the central element that would tie it all together. It was getting dark. I didn't turn on the light, sitting in the chair by the window and watching as night gradually engulfed the street. Streetlights cast yellow circles on the sidewalks, and the occasional passerby hurried about their business. It was a normal evening in Wharton, as if nothing had happened, as if the world had not lost a bright young life. When my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket, I jumped. It was an old cell phone that I rarely used. I preferred a landline. A message. Who would need to text me at this hour? I opened the message and felt the back of my neck grow cold. The text was from Hazel's number. "I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery. Now." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, not believing my eyes. It's impossible. I saw my granddaughter's body in the morgue, at the funeral, saw her coffin being lowered into the ground. Someone's cruel joke? Had my phone been hacked? Or... I dismissed the irrational hope that had flashed in my heart for a moment. Dead people don't send messages. But someone had used Hazel's phone to contact me, and that someone wanted to meet at the cemetery, the place where my granddaughter had just been buried. Logic told me it could be a trap, but who would want to lure a 73-year-old man to a cemetery at night? If it was related to Hazel's death, and I was sure it was, then I had to take the risk. The decision came quickly. I got up, put on my coat, and took an old revolver out of the desk drawer. A memento from my father that I kept more for sentimental reasons than for protection. I checked the cylinder. 2 bullets left over from when I used to go to the shooting range. Not much, but better than nothing. Nighttime Wharton was deserted. A taxi took me to the cemetery in 15 minutes. The driver, an elderly man with a gray mustache, looked at me strangely when I gave him the address. "Are you sure, sir? The cemetery is closed at this time." "I know," I replied curtly. "I have a key." It was a lie, but the driver didn't press the issue. He dropped me off at the gate and drove away, leaving me alone in front of the tall wrought iron fence. Green Hills Cemetery is the oldest in Wharton, founded in the 18th century. During the day it looked peaceful, with well-maintained paths and neat rows of gravestones. At night, however, in the light of the crescent moon, the cemetery turned into the setting for a horror movie. Dark silhouettes of trees, bizarre shadows, creaks and rustles. The gate was locked, but a low side gate was ajar. Someone was clearly waiting for me. I clenched the handle of my revolver in my pocket and stepped into the cemetery. Hazel's grave was in the new part, 300 meters from the entrance. I walked slowly, looking around carefully, listening to every sound. My old knees ached, reminding me of my age, but the adrenaline gave me strength. The moon periodically disappeared behind the clouds, plunging the cemetery into complete darkness. At such moments I stopped, waiting for the road to become visible again. The freshly dug earth on Hazel's grave stood out as a dark rectangle among the grass. There was no one else in sight. I stopped a few steps away from the grave, looking around. There was complete silence. No wind, no rustling leaves, no singing nightbirds. It was as if the whole world had held its breath. "Is anyone here?" I asked quietly, feeling silly. Who did I expect to see? The ghost of my granddaughter? The answer was silence. I walked closer to the grave, looking at the fresh flowers left there during the day. Suddenly I noticed something white on the mound, an envelope weighed down by a stone. It hadn't been there when I left the cemetery after the funeral. Bending down, I picked up the envelope. It was ordinary with no writing on it. I opened it and found a sheet of paper and a small flash drive inside. A sudden sound made me jump and turn around sharply. The crunch of branches, footsteps. Someone was approaching from the direction of the old family crypts. "Who's there?" I straightened up, gripping the revolver in my pocket tighter. A figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, a female silhouette, too small for an adult woman. In the moonlight, I recognized her short red hair. "Freya?" I said with relief and surprise. She stopped a few steps away, looking around nervously. She was wearing the same black sweater she had worn at the funeral that afternoon. "Did you send the message?" I asked, taking my hand out of my pocket. "Yes." Her voice sounded tense. "I'm sorry for contacting you this way, but I couldn't think of anything else. I needed to make sure you would come alone, without the police." "Why all the secrecy?" I held up the envelope. "What is it?" Freya took a few steps closer, still keeping her distance. "It's from Hazel. She left it with me a week before what happened. She told me to give it to you if anything happened to her." I felt my pulse quicken. She expected something to happen to her. Freya nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were cold. "She was scared, Mr. Quincy. Very scared. But she didn't want to talk about what she was doing. She said the less I knew, the safer I would be." I glanced at the envelope in my hand. Hazel had sensed danger, and she had prepared for the worst. "How did you get access to her phone?" I asked. Freya took a smartphone out of her pocket. I recognized the case with the constellations that Hazel always carried. "She left it with me too. She said that if she suddenly stopped communicating, I should text you these exact words from her number." The phone was turned off. I only turned it on today to send the message. "Why not right after she died? Why wait until the evening after the funeral?" "I was afraid," Freya admitted. When they found her dead, I panicked. I didn't know if I could trust the police, if I could trust anyone. Hazel said that influential people were involved. I decided to wait until after the funeral, thinking it would be safer. I looked closely at the girl, trying to determine if she was telling the truth. There was genuine fear in her eyes, but no signs of lying. "What do you know about what Hazel was doing?" I asked. "Not much." Freya glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid we were being listened to. "We worked in the same lab. Hazel was doing an internship there for her research in criminalistics. She was studying new methods for detecting synthetic opioids. A couple of months ago, she became very quiet and withdrawn. She spent a lot of time at the computer, studying some reports and test data. When I asked her about it, she was evasive. She only said that she had stumbled upon something serious that could have major consequences. And then she came to my house, very upset. It was a week before her death. She gave me an envelope, a flash drive, and her phone. She said that if anything happened to her, I should give everything to you. Only you, no one else. She said she didn't trust the police, that everything was too complicated. I opened the envelope and unfolded the piece of paper. Hazel's handwriting was neat, with a characteristic slant to the right. "Grandpa, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. I discovered that my father is involved in a corruption scheme at Nexron. They approved the drug Neuralex while hiding information about serious side effects. People are dying. All the evidence is on the flash drive. Be careful, they know I suspect something. Don't trust anyone, especially Dad. I love you. Hazel." I reread the note twice, feeling a cold rage growing inside me. So Eden was involved in his own daughter's death. My intuition hadn't failed me. "Have you read this?" I asked Freya, looking up from the note. She shook her head. "No." Hazel sealed the envelope. I promised not to open it. "What about the flash drive?" "No," she paused. "Mr. Quincy, I'm afraid. If Hazel was killed because of what she discovered, then we're both in danger." I nodded, understanding her fear. "Thank you for finding the courage to contact me. I'll take care of it now." "What are you going to do?" Her voice sounded anxious. "First, I'll examine the contents of the flash drive. Then I'll decide how to proceed. You'd better leave town for a while. Do you have any relatives you can stay with?" "My sister in Richmond," Freya replied. "I've already packed my things. I'll leave on the first bus in the morning." "Good. And be careful with your phones and social media. Don't leave any digital traces." She nodded, then handed me Hazel's phone. "Take it. I think you should have it." I took the smartphone, feeling a strange sensation, as if I had received a part of Hazel. Her messages, photos, notes, a piece of her life. "Thank you, Freya. And again, be careful." She took a step back, about to leave, but suddenly stopped. "Mr. Quincy, Hazel believed in you. She said you were the only person she trusted completely, the only one with the courage and knowledge to see this through to the end." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I won't let her down. Freya nodded, turned, and quickly disappeared among the trees. I was left alone at my granddaughter's grave, holding her last message and the evidence of the crime that had probably cost her her life. The way back from the cemetery seemed longer. Every rustle, every shadow made me wary. If Hazel was killed because of what she had discovered, then I could be under surveillance too. I didn't call a taxi from the cemetery, but walked several blocks, constantly looking back and checking to see if I was being followed. When I got home, the first thing I did was lock all the doors and lower the blinds. I took out my laptop, old, but still working. I inserted Hazel's flash drive. The files were organized into neat folders with dates and names. My granddaughter had always been methodical. The first thing I did was open a text document titled Read First. It was a detailed explanation of what Hazel had discovered. Nexron had developed a new drug for the treatment of chronic pain called Neurolex. During clinical trials, serious side effects were discovered. 5% of patients developed liver failure, and 2% developed irreversible neurological disorders. But this data was hidden from the final reports. Eden, working as a lobbyist for the company, knew about these risks. Moreover, he actively participated in concealing information by bribing officials in regulatory agencies. Neurolex was approved and went on sale. People began to die. Hazel, while interning at the laboratory, accidentally discovered the initial test reports. Her curiosity and sense of justice prevented her from ignoring this. She began to collect evidence, copies of documents, recordings of conversations, emails. Gradually, a picture emerged of a large-scale corruption scheme, at the center of which was my son. When the amount of information she had gathered became significant, Hazel decided to share her findings with her supervisor, Professor Elliott. The next day, the professor did not come to work. 2 days later, he was found dead in his own home, presumably from a heart attack. This frightened Hazel. She realized that her own life might be in danger, so she prepared a package of evidence for me and gave it to Freya. I spent the whole night studying the materials on the flash drive. Photos of documents, screenshots of emails, audio recordings of conversations. Among them was a conversation between Eden and some official, where they openly discussed the amount of bribes for turning a blind eye to certain discrepancies in the reports. Hazel had gathered real compromising evidence. By morning, I realized two things. First, my granddaughter had indeed been killed because of her investigation. Second, I had enough evidence in my hands to destroy Nexron and send Eden to prison for many years. But I had to act carefully. Influential people would stop at nothing, even murder, to keep their secrets. I needed a plan. And help. I opened Hazel's phone, looking for contacts that might be useful. Among her recent calls were Freya's number, a number belonging to someone named Liam, and several calls from Eden in the last few days before her death. That piqued my interest. Why did her son call his daughter so often before her death? Did he suspect her investigation? Was he trying to warn her or threaten her? Suddenly, I jumped at a sharp sound. Someone was knocking on the door. The clock showed 6 in the morning, too early for regular visitors. I quickly turned off my laptop, hid the flash drive and Hazel's phone in the pocket of my bathrobe. The knocking repeated more insistently. I approached the door without opening it. "Who's there?" I asked, keeping my hand on my revolver. "Wharton Police, Mr. Quincy. Detective Foster. We need to talk." Detective Foster didn't stay long. He came to report that a note had been found in Hazel's apartment that resembled a suicide note. General phrases about pressure, fatigue, hopelessness. I immediately realized that the note had been planted to definitively close the case as a suicide, but I didn't share this with the detective. The less the police knew about my investigation, the safer it would be. After he left, I spent several hours thinking about my strategy. I needed to carefully study the materials Hazel had collected, understand the scale of the crime and the extent of Eden's involvement. I made some strong coffee, locked myself in my office, and immersed myself in my work. The flash drive contained more information than I had anticipated. Hazel was methodical and thorough. Each document was labeled with its source, date of receipt, and a brief description of its significance. She organized the materials into folders: clinical trials, internal correspondence, financial documents, victim testimonies, conversation transcripts, and Eden's involvement. I started with the clinical trials folder. First were the original test reports for Neurorex, a synthetic opioid intended for the treatment of chronic pain. Nexron had positioned it as a breakthrough, an effective painkiller with minimal risk of addiction, but the reality turned out to be different. The initial reports, which were not intended for external audit, documented serious side effects. 5.3% of trial participants developed acute liver failure. 2.7% developed irreversible neurological disorders, ranging from tremors to complete paralysis. 0.9% died. Hazel posted the final reports submitted to the Food and Drug Administration next to them. In them, the figures had been radically altered. Liver failure, 0.4%. Neurological disorders, 0.2%. Fatalities, 0. The difference was shocking. The internal correspondence folder contained emails between Nextron executives openly discussing the need to optimize the trial data. "We have invested too much in development to allow adverse side effects to stop the launch," wrote the company's CEO, Reed Bellinger. "Adjust the data as you see fit, but make sure there are no traces left," replied the project's chief researcher. How did Hazel gain access to these letters? At the bottom of each document, she left notes about their origin. It turns out that her research supervisor, Professor Elliott, was a consultant for Nexron in the early stages of Neurolex's development. He kept copies of the correspondence, having moral doubts about the project. After his sudden death, Hazel, who was helping to sort through his work files, discovered these documents. I moved on to the financial documents folder. It contained records of suspicious transactions between Nexron and various consulting firms, which Hazel discovered were owned by high-ranking officials from regulatory agencies or their relatives. A classic bribery laundering scheme. The victim testimonials folder was particularly impressive. Hazel had collected the stories of 15 people whose health had been irreparably damaged after taking Neurolex. A 40-year-old construction worker, now confined to a wheelchair due to neurological damage. A young mother in need of a liver transplant. The widow of a man who died 2 weeks after starting the drug. They all filed complaints, but Nexron successfully fought off all lawsuits, arguing that the link between the drug and the complications had not been proven. Then I opened the conversation recordings folder. Here were audio files that Hazel had secretly recorded. I put on my headphones and played the first recording. "We all understand the risks, Reed." It was my son Eden's voice. "But taking the drug off the market now is financial suicide. The stock will drop 40% at least." "People are dying, Eden," replied another voice, presumably Reed Bellinger's. "The FDA is starting to suspect something. A couple more deaths, and they could initiate a full investigation." "That won't happen," Eden replied confidently. "I have contacts on the committee. A couple more lunches, a couple of donations to the right political campaigns, and everything will be under control. Just make sure your lab technicians don't talk too much." I listened to the conversation, feeling an icy rage growing inside me. My own son was talking about human lives as acceptable losses for the sake of profit. The man I had raised had turned into a monster without conscience or compassion. The second recording was even more shocking. A conversation between Eden and an unknown man, judging by the context, an official from the regulatory authorities. 200,000 as usual, Eden said, plus a 50 bonus if the report is particularly favorable. "I need more," the man replied. "The risks are increasing. There's too much noise around these side effects." 300, last offer. Deal. Send it through the usual channel. I sat there stunned by the scale of the corruption. Eden didn't just know about the risks. He was actively involved in covering them up by bribing officials. And behind this soulless machine of lies were real human tragedies. Finally, I opened the last folder, Eden's involvement. Here, Hazel had gathered everything she could find about my son's role in the scheme. It turned out he wasn't just a lobbyist. He was the architect of the entire strategy to promote the drug, despite the known risks. It was Eden who proposed the scheme with fictitious consulting firms to launder bribes. He personally met with key officials, organized educational events for doctors, essentially disguised bribes, and controlled the entire process of obtaining permits. For his efforts, Eden received not only a substantial salary, but also bonuses tied to drug sales. The more Neurolex was sold, the richer my son became. Blood money. In the same folder, I found a personal note from Hazel, dated a week before her death. "Talk to my father on the phone today. I couldn't hide that I knew something. He insisted on meeting, said he could explain everything. There was something strange in his voice. Not just anxiety, but real fear. I think he suspects how much information I have. I don't know if I can trust him. Part of me wants to give him a chance to explain, but another part reminds me of Professor Elliot and his heart attack. I can't take the risk. Tomorrow I'll give everything to Grandpa through Freya, in case something happens to me. The lines written by my granddaughter's hand made me shudder. She knew she was in danger. She knew and was preparing for the worst. I continued studying the materials. Hazel discovered this story by accident while working on her thesis project in criminology. Her research focused on new methods for detecting synthetic opioids in postmortem tissue. To do this, she gained access to the county morgue's database, studying cases of overdose deaths from the past year. It was there that she noticed a strange pattern, an increase in the number of deaths classified as liver failure of unknown etiology, or nonspecific multiple organ failure. Studying the medical records, she discovered that many of these patients had taken Neurolex. It was too much to be a mere coincidence. Her research supervisor, Professor Elliot, was initially skeptical of her observations, but agreed to help with further investigation. Together, they requested tissue samples from 5 deceased patients and conducted an independent analysis. The results were alarming. All samples showed traces of Neurolex metabolites in concentrations significantly higher than therapeutic levels, even though the patients had been taking the drug at the recommended doses. This indicated a serious defect in the drug's metabolism. In some patients, it accumulated in tissues to toxic levels, even when the dosage was strictly adhered to. Hazel and Professor Elliot prepared a preliminary report, which they planned to send to the regulatory authorities. But the day before it was to be sent, the professor died suddenly. Shocked by the death of her mentor, Hazel became even more suspicious. She took his computer, ostensibly to save the scientific materials, and found correspondence with Nexron, including the very documents about clinical trials with falsified data. When the picture began to come together, Hazel checked which of the company's executives could have been involved in concealing the information. That's how she came across her own father. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. It was already dawn outside. I spent the whole night immersed in the materials Hazel had collected, and now I could see the whole picture clearly: a criminal conspiracy between a pharmaceutical company and regulatory authorities that had resulted in dozens of deaths. And at the center of this conspiracy was my son. Hazel had apparently planned to give me all the evidence and then go to the federal authorities together, bypassing the local police, who might have been corrupt. But she didn't make it. Someone found out about her investigation and decided to stop her. Staging an overdose was a cruel but clever move. Given that Hazel worked with tissue samples from people who had died from opioid use, traces of drugs in her blood would not have aroused suspicion among those in the know. It could have been attributed to accidental contamination while working with samples. To everyone else, it looked like a sad case of drug addiction in a young woman. But to me, it was obvious that this was murder. The strange bruise on her neck, the petechial hemorrhages, the unusual injection mark. Everything pointed to a violent death disguised as an overdose. I returned to Hazel's note where she mentioned her last conversation with her father. Eden knew about her investigation. Could he have ordered the murder of his own daughter? Or was she eliminated without his knowledge? Either way, his hands were stained with her blood, if not directly, then through the criminal system he had created. Suddenly, I remembered something important. In Hazel's files, there was a file called Nexron Distribution Plan Phase 2. I quickly found it and opened it. It was an internal company document marked strictly confidential. It described plans to expand sales of Neurolex to the international market, starting with Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, where regulatory control was weaker. The first phase of international expansion was to begin in 3 days with the presentation of the drug at a pharmaceutical exhibition in Prague. And that's where Eden and Tamsin were headed. That's why they were in such a hurry to fly out right after the funeral. It wasn't just a business trip, but a key stage in a criminal plan. I knew I didn't have much time left. If Neurolex entered the international market, the number of victims would increase many times over. I had to act immediately but cautiously. I had evidence, but I didn't know who I could trust. The local police could be corrupt. According to Hazel's files, Nexron had generously financed the current sheriff's election campaign. The federal authorities would be more reliable, but how could I contact them quickly without attracting attention? And how could I ensure my own safety? I remembered an old acquaintance, Howard Mercier, who used to work for the state prosecutor's office and was now retired. We had worked together on several difficult cases in the past, and I trusted his integrity. Perhaps he could help me get in touch with incorruptible federal agents. But before calling Howard, I decided to check something else. Hazel's files often mentioned a Lauren Chen, a chemist from the lab who helped her test samples. If Lauren was still working at the same lab, she could confirm part of the story and possibly provide additional evidence. I found her contact information in Hazel's folder, and after some hesitation, dialed the number. The phone was turned off. This alarmed me. Was it caution or a sign of trouble? I decided to look for alternative ways to contact her and found her profile on a professional network. Her last post was dated yesterday afternoon, which meant that Lauren was most likely fine. I sent her a short message, introducing myself as Hazel's grandfather and asking to meet her about an important matter related to her granddaughter's research. As I sent the message, I realized I was taking a risk. If Lauren was part of the conspiracy, it could draw unwanted attention to me. But I needed allies, and it was a calculated risk. While I waited for a reply, I decided to check Hazel's phone again. Perhaps there were messages or contacts that could be useful. Unlocking the screen, I noticed that in the last days of her life, Hazel had often called someone named Liam. Judging by the length and frequency of the calls, he was someone close to her. A boyfriend? Although she had never mentioned a romantic relationship in our conversations. I found his photo in her contacts, a young man with dark hair and a serious expression. In the note for the contact, Hazel had written, Security Lab XT342, so a colleague. On the last day of her life, Hazel sent Liam a message. Meet me at 7 tonight. Bring those samples we talked about. I think I found what I was looking for. It changes everything. Apparently, the meeting never took place. What happened to Liam? Did he know about Hazel's investigation? Could he have been involved in her death? The questions multiplied, but the answers were becoming clearer. The puzzle was gradually coming together, and at its center was Neuralex, a drug that was supposed to ease suffering, but instead brought death. And next to it was my son, a man I once knew, but who had turned into a monster willing to sacrifice the lives of innocents, including his own daughter, for profit. I knew I needed a plan, a quick and effective one. Time was running out, maybe even hours. If Nexron found out that the evidence Hazel had gathered had fallen into my hands, my life would also be in danger. But I couldn't just disappear or hide. I had to finish what my granddaughter had started. I had to get justice, for her and for all the victims of the heartless pharmaceutical machine. The materials from Hazel's flash drive gave me an understanding of what had happened, but I was missing the final, decisive piece of evidence. The official cause of death, heroin overdose, still made me suspicious. The toxicology report confirmed the presence of opioids in Hazel's blood. But what if it wasn't heroin? What if they were just trying to imitate it? I needed access to more detailed autopsy results and tissue samples. It was risky. I no longer worked at the morgue, and such interference bordered on breaking the law. But I saw no other way. For Hazel's sake, for the sake of all the victims of Neuralex, I had to find the truth. First, I called Howard Mercer, a former prosecutor and longtime friend. We agreed to meet at his country house, neutral territory where surveillance was unlikely. Howard met me on the porch of his small cottage. The years had not been kind to him. He had aged considerably since we last met, his hair gray and thin, but his mind remained sharp. Oliver, he shook my hand. My condolences. I heard about your granddaughter. Thank you, Howard, but it's not just about condolences. I need your help. Inside the house, over a cup of strong coffee, I told him everything. About the suspicious circumstances of Hazel's death, about the material on the flash drive, about Nexron's criminal activities, and about Eden's role. Howard listened without interrupting, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. These are serious accusations, Oliver, he finally said, especially against your own son. I know, but I have evidence. However, I need to check something else. I need access to the full results of Hazel's autopsy and, if possible, samples of her tissue. Howard frowned. That's not easy to arrange. You know the procedure. I know, but you still have connections in the prosecutor's office. You can file an official request for a re-examination in light of new circumstances. What circumstances? Do you have anything specific? I took out my phone and showed him the photos of the bruises on Hazel's neck that I had taken during the examination of the body. These marks were not noted in the official report, and they are characteristic of strangulation. In addition, here, I pointed to the petechial hemorrhages in her eyes, are classic signs of asphyxia. Howard studied the photos carefully. Yes, it looks suspicious, but we need more to request a re-examination. We need witness testimony or new evidence. What about this? I showed him Hazel's note. She was clearly afraid for her life. Howard read the note and rubbed his chin. This could work, especially in combination with what she found. I'll call Margaret Foster at the district attorney's office. She owes me a favor. Can I trust her? Margaret is one of the few truly honest people in the system. If she agrees to help, she'll do it right and without making a fuss. While Howard was on the phone, I looked through my notes on the case. In the victim testimony folder on Hazel's flash drive, there was mention of a strange coincidence. Several victims of Neurolex had metabolites in their blood that were initially mistaken for traces of heroin. This seemed like a promising lead to me. An hour later, Howard returned with news. Margaret will arrange for you to have access to the lab. Unofficially, after hours. You'll have 2 hours to do everything. One of the lab technicians, Victor Ramos, will be waiting for you. He'll have everything you need ready. Thanks, Howard. I owe you one. Don't mention it, he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. Just be careful. If what you say is true, these people will stop at nothing. That evening, I arrived at the forensic laboratory building. A young Latino man met me at the service entrance. Dr. Quincy, I'm Victor. Margaret told me you were coming. The lab was empty. Perfect conditions for my unusual work. Victor led me to the toxicology department and showed me Hazel's case file. Here is the complete toxicology report, he said, handing me a folder, and the tissue samples you requested. On the table were test tubes containing samples of Hazel's blood, liver, and kidneys. I felt a lump in my throat. These tissues had once been part of my granddaughter, but I quickly suppressed my emotions. Now I had to remain professional. I'll need a mass spectrometer, I told Victor, and access to the metabolite database. Everything is ready, doctor. I can assist you if necessary. Thank you, but I'd rather do it myself. The fewer people involved, the safer it is for everyone. Victor nodded understandingly and left me alone with my work, saying he would be in the next room if I needed help. I began by studying the complete toxicology report. At first glance, everything confirmed the heroin overdose theory. Morphine and 6-monoacetylmorphine, typical heroin metabolites, were found in the blood and tissues. But there was something strange. The concentration was too uniform across all tissues. In a typical overdose, the distribution of metabolites is uneven, with higher concentrations in the liver and kidneys. Next, I looked at the time of death. According to the official report, Hazel died between 9 p.m. and midnight. But analysis of her stomach contents showed that her last meal was about 6 to 8 hours before her death. According to her phone records, she had lunch with her colleague Liam at 2 p.m. This shifted the probable time of death to 8 p.m., earlier than stated in the report. I decided to conduct additional analysis of the samples. I prepared the tissues for mass spectrometry, trying to work as carefully as possible. 36 years of practice had not been in vain. My hands remembered every movement. While the device was analyzing the samples, I looked through the database of metabolites of various opioids. I came across some interesting information about the synthetic opioid, Neurolex. During its metabolism, compounds were formed that were similar in structure to heroin metabolites, but with slight differences in molecular structure. This difference is not always noticeable in a routine analysis, but specialized tests could detect it. The machine beeped, signaling the completion of the analysis. I studied the results and felt my pulse quicken. Hazel's tissues contained traces not of heroin, but of Neurolex in very high concentrations. But there was another oddity. The samples contained a substance that should not have been present in either heroin or Neurolex. I checked the database and found that this substance was an analog of fentanyl known as shadow, a super powerful synthetic opioid hundreds of times stronger than morphine. It was not used in medicine because of its extreme toxicity. But the most interesting thing was that shadow was a byproduct of the synthesis of Neuralex, which was usually filtered out during the manufacturing process. The picture began to come together. Hazel did not die of a heroin overdose. She was killed by a lethal dose of shadow, a substance that only a limited number of people involved in the production of Neuralex had access to. I checked one more aspect, the injection site. According to the report, the mark was found in the left elbow pit. But additional photos that were not included in the main report showed that there was a small area of swelling and redness around the injection site, a sign of post-mortem or near-mortem administration. A person injecting themselves with heroin would not have created such a picture. Everything pointed to one thing: Hazel had been murdered. She was first strangled, hence the bruises on her neck and petechial hemorrhages, and then injected with shadow to simulate an overdose. And this poison could only have been obtained from Nexron's laboratories. I gathered all the evidence, made copies of the reports and photographs, and recorded the results of my analysis. Now I had irrefutable evidence not only against Nexron as a company, but also against specific individuals involved in Hazel's murder. Victor helped me pack all the materials into a waterproof envelope. "Did you find what you were looking for, Doctor?" he asked. "Yes, Victor. More than I expected." "You realize this is dangerous? If what you're looking for is connected to a major pharmaceutical company." "I know the risks, but my granddaughter deserves justice." He nodded respectfully. "Is there anything else I can do to help?" "Just forget I was here, and thank you for your help." Leaving the lab around midnight, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, I had proof that Hazel's death was not an accident or the result of her own mistakes. She had been murdered, and now I knew how and why. But that knowledge made me a target. If Nexron found out that I had uncovered the truth, my life would be in danger. I had to act quickly and cautiously. I decided not to call a taxi from the lab. Too easy to track. Instead, I walked a few blocks to a small 24-hour cafe where I called a car. The driver, a young guy with headphones, didn't pay much attention to me. Just another elderly passenger in the night city. About halfway home, I noticed a dark sedan in the rearview mirror that seemed to be following us. It kept its distance, but at every turn it ended up behind us. Paranoia or a real threat? "Young man," I said to the driver, "could you make a small detour? I think I forgot to buy my medication." "Of course, sir. Where exactly?" "To the pharmacy on Maple Street." It was a test. If the sedan was really following me, it would have to change its route to follow us. And it did. When we turned onto Maple Street, the sedan turned too, keeping its distance. "Actually, I've changed my mind," I said to the driver. "Can we go to the police station on Oak Avenue?" The driver gave me a strange look, but nodded. "As you wish, sir." The sedan continued to follow us, but when we approached the police station, it suddenly turned off and disappeared. This confirmed my suspicions. I was indeed being followed. "You know, I think I'll go home after all," I said to the driver as we passed the station. "Sorry for the fuss." I kept a close eye on the road for the rest of the way, but the sedan didn't reappear. However, I didn't relax. Just because I had lost one pursuer didn't mean the danger was over. The driver dropped me off 2 blocks from my house. I decided it would be safer to walk and check the neighborhood. The night was quiet, the streets deserted. I moved slowly, listening to every sound, examining every shadow. When I was less than a block from home, I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, purposeful. Turning around, I saw a male figure approaching me. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled down over his eyes. There was a sense of menace in his gait. I quickened my pace as much as my old knees would allow. I was only about 100 meters from home. The footsteps behind me quickened too. The man was clearly targeting me. I had an old revolver in my pocket, but I didn't want to take it out on the street. That could have led to unpredictable consequences. Instead, I turned sharply between the houses. A narrow passage, known only to local residents, led straight to my backyard. My pursuer didn't expect this maneuver and lost sight of me for a second. That was enough time for me to dive into the passageway and speed up as fast as my health would allow. I heard the man curse as he realized his mistake and rushed after me. But I had the advantage. I knew the area like the back of my hand, every nook and cranny, every gate. When I reached Mrs. Patterson's fence, I took advantage of a hole that only the local children and I knew about. An old man who had once repaired this fence for his elderly neighbor. Squeezing through the narrow gap, I found myself in her garden. Judging by the sounds, my pursuer tried to climb over the fence, but stumbled upon Mrs. Patterson's overgrown rose bushes, her pride and joy in the best protection against uninvited guests. I heard muffled curses and the sound of fabric tearing. Without wasting any time, I crossed the garden and went out onto the neighboring street. From there, it was only half a block to my house. I practically ran, feeling my heart pounding and my legs numb from the unusual exertion. Reaching the back porch, I quickly unlocked the door, went inside and carefully locked it behind me. Then I checked all the windows and the front door. Only after making sure that the house was securely protected did I allow myself to fall into a chair, trying to catch my breath. The pursuit confirmed my worst fears. Nexron knew I was digging into them and had already taken action. Perhaps they had been following me from the very beginning, from the moment of Hazel's funeral. Or maybe they had received information about my visit to the laboratory. In any case, I was now certain of two things. My life was in danger, and I had very little time. I needed to urgently pass on the evidence I had gathered to reliable people and seek justice for Hazel and all the other victims of Neuralex. I took the envelope with the evidence out of my pocket and placed it on the table next to Hazel's flashcard. Now I had everything I needed to prove not only Nexron's criminal negligence in developing and promoting a dangerous drug, but also the company's direct involvement in my granddaughter's murder. I had to act and act quickly. I decided to contact Howard and Margaret Foster from the prosecutor's office first thing in the morning. But first I had to make copies of all the documents and store them in different places, as insurance. I knew I was in mortal danger, but for the first time in many days I felt something like hope. The truth about Hazel's death had been revealed, and I would do everything in my power to ensure that those responsible were punished. After the night's chase, I knew I didn't have much time left. Nexron knew about my investigation and would stop at nothing to keep its secrets. I had to act quickly and cautiously. I greeted the dawn at work. I laid out all the evidence I had gathered on the table. Hazel's flashcard, the results of my toxicology analysis, photos of the strange bruises on her neck, recordings of Eden's phone conversations with officials. All of this had to be handed over to reliable people in law enforcement who could open a case and bring it to trial. Howard Mercer advised me to contact Margaret Foster at the district attorney's office, and I decided to follow his advice. But first I had to secure the evidence. I made 3 sets of copies of all the materials. I hid one at home, in a secret compartment under the floorboards in my bedroom that only I knew about. I sealed the second set in an envelope and took it to a storage locker at the bus station. I planned to give the third set to Margaret in person. When all the preparations were complete, I called Howard to arrange a meeting with Margaret. He answered after the 5th ring, his voice sounding tense. "Oliver, listen carefully. I'm being followed. I think you are too." "I know," I replied quietly. "There was an attempted attack last night." "Damn," Howard exhaled. "This is more serious than I thought. Margaret is ready to meet you today at noon at Martha's Cafe. It's a fairly crowded place, so it will be safer there." "I'll be there. Thank you, Howard." "Oliver, be careful. These people will stop at nothing." I hung up and looked at my watch. 9 in the morning. I still had 3 hours before the meeting. I decided to use that time to review the materials again, to make sure I hadn't missed anything. There should be no gaps in the case against Nexon and Eden. Suddenly the doorbell rang. I tensed up. I wasn't expecting any visitors. And after yesterday's chase, any stranger aroused suspicion. I quietly approached the door and looked through the peephole. Freya, Hazel's friend, was standing on the doorstep. Her red hair was hidden under a hood, her face tense. I opened the door, quickly pulled her inside and locked it behind her. "What happened?" I asked. "I thought you left town." "I was going to," Freya replied, dropping her hood. "But I couldn't. I feel like I have to help see this through, for Hazel's sake." I looked at her closely, trying to determine if she could be trusted. Her eyes showed sincere determination. "How can I help?" she asked. I hesitated for only a second, then made my decision. "I need backup. I have a meeting with the prosecutor at noon, but I'm not sure I'll make it there. I'm being followed, and yesterday they tried to attack me." Freya paled. Do you think they might kill you? It's possible. Nexron will do anything to keep its secrets. I took out a sealed envelope with documents. Here's a backup set of evidence. If something happens to me or I don't show up for the meeting, take it to Margaret Foster at the district attorney's office. Only to her personally. Freya took the envelope with trembling hands. I'll do everything, I promise. There's something else, I said, taking out a small tape recorder. It's an old model, but it works perfectly. Record everything I'm about to tell you. For the next half hour, I dictated a detailed description of my investigation, from my suspicions about Hazel's violent death to the discovery of the shadow in her tissues. Freya listened attentively, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. When I finished, she put the recorder and envelope in her bag. What should I do next? Wait at Martha's Cafe from 11 to 2. If I don't show up, follow the plan. Go to Margaret's. And be careful. Don't go back to your apartment. Don't use your credit cards. Only cash. Only public places. Freya nodded, her face serious. I understand. Justice for Hazel is all that matters. After Freya left, I felt a strange sense of relief. Now I had insurance. Even if something happened to me, the truth would still come out. Hazel would get justice. At 11:30, I left the house. I decided not to call a taxi, too easy to track. Instead, I slowly made my way on foot toward the center. It was a clear day with lots of people on the streets, a relatively safe environment. I kept looking back, checking to see if I was being followed. At the intersection of Oak and Maple, I noticed a black sedan that looked suspiciously like the one that had followed me yesterday. To check, I turned sharply into an alley. The sedan followed. There was no doubt about it, I was being followed. I quickened my pace, deciding to use my knowledge of the area. I crossed several yards, cut through an old abandoned garden, and dove into a doorway. It seemed that I had shaken off my pursuers, but when I came out onto Cherry Street, the sedan suddenly appeared right in front of me, blocking my path. Two burly men in dark suits got out of the car. One headed toward me, the other circled around behind me, cutting off my escape route. Mr. Quincy, the first one said in a colorless voice, you need to come with us. I looked around. The street was empty, with no help in sight. What if I refuse? The man smiled slightly, revealing the handle of a gun under his jacket. I wouldn't recommend that. We just want to talk. I knew I had no choice. I had left my revolver at home, deciding not to take it to the meeting with the prosecutor. Now I regretted it. Okay, I raised my hands. Where are we going? You'll see. The man opened the back door of the sedan. They sat me between two guards. The third, the driver, pulled away. No one said a word. I tried to memorize the route, but soon realized that we were driving in circles. They were deliberately covering their tracks. 40 minutes later, the sedan stopped at the gate of a country mansion surrounded by a high fence. The area seemed familiar. I had been here once before, at a charity event organized by Nexron. It was the residence of Reed Bellinger, the company's CEO. I was led into the house and through a spacious hall to an office overlooking a well-kept garden. There were 3 people in the room. Reed Bellinger, a tall, graying man with cold eyes, a man I didn't know, dressed in an expensive suit, and Eden. My son was sitting in a chair by the window, nervously tapping his fingers on the armrest. Father, he said, without even getting up to greet me, you've caused us a lot of trouble. And you killed your daughter, I replied calmly. I think my trouble is nothing compared to that. Eden flinched as if struck. I didn't kill Hazel. But you know who did, I said, looking around at the others. You all know. Bellinger gestured for me to sit down. I remained standing. Mr. Quincy, he said in a soft, almost fatherly tone, we brought you here to offer a solution to our problem. Which one exactly? The murder of my granddaughter? The concealment of information about a deadly drug? The bribery of officials? The whole spectrum of issues, Bellinger replied calmly. We have a proposal that could satisfy all parties. Only justice can satisfy me, I snapped. Eden rose from his chair and came closer. Father, you don't understand the scale of this. We're talking about billions of dollars, thousands of jobs, the reputation of the entire pharmaceutical industry. One drug, even one with problems, isn't worth all that. And your daughter's life? How much is that worth? Eden looked away. It was an accident. She shouldn't have died. An accident? I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. She was strangled and then given a lethal dose of shadow, a byproduct of your miracle drug. I've seen the toxicology results, Eden. I know the truth. Bellinger and the third man exchanged glances. Where did you get this information? The stranger asked sharply. That's not important, I replied. What's important is that I have it, and I'm not the only one. Eden stepped toward me, his face contorted with rage. What have you done, Father? Who did you tell? Everyone who needs to know, I said, looking him straight in the eye. The federal authorities already have the evidence. You're all under arrest, you just don't know it yet. It was a bluff, but it seemed to work. A shadow of concern crossed Bellinger's face. He's bluffing, said the third man. The feds would already be here. Not necessarily, I replied. They're putting together a team. An operation of this scale requires preparation. Eden paced nervously around the office, then turned sharply to me. You've always been like this, Father. Self-assured, arrogant. You think you know everything better than everyone else. But the world has changed. The rules are different now. Rules? I smiled bitterly. Killing innocent people for profit is now the rules? Don't twist my words, Eden snapped. Neuralex has saved thousands of lives, relieved people of chronic pain. Yes, there were side effects. Every drug has them. You deliberately concealed information about fatalities. I remained outwardly calm, though inside I was seething. You bribed officials, falsified documents, and when Hazel discovered the truth, you killed her. I didn't want her to get hurt. Eden's voice flashed with something resembling remorse for the first time. I just wanted to talk to her, convince her that she didn't understand the whole picture. But she was as stubborn as you are. She didn't want to listen. So you admit you were involved in her death? Eden turned away, looking out the window. I didn't order her to be killed. I just asked some people to take care of the problem. I thought they would just take the documents and intimidate her. But they went too far, didn't they? My voice sounded icy calm, even though inside I was seething with pain and rage. Your own daughter, Eden, your flesh and blood. Business is business, Bellinger interjected. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Higher interests? I looked at him with disgust. You mean your bonuses and stock options? I mean progress, Bellinger snapped. Medicine cannot advance without risk. Yes, Neuralex has flaws, but the next generation of drugs will be better because of this experience. How many more people have to die for your progress? I asked. There was silence. Bellinger and the third man exchanged glances. Enough of this debate, said the stranger. Mr. Quincy, here's our offer. $10 million, immediately, plus a guarantee of safety for you and everyone you care about, in exchange for all the evidence and your silence. I laughed. Do you seriously think I would sell justice for Hazel, for all your victims? Everything has a price, the man shrugged. $15 million, final offer. My price is justice, I replied firmly, and you'll pay it, all of you. Eden approached me, his face contorted with rage. You've always been such a righteous man, Father, but this time you've miscalculated. Where's the evidence? With the feds? I don't think so. Otherwise, they'd already be here. At that moment, sirens sounded outside. Lots of sirens approaching the house. Bellinger's face changed. What's that? I smiled, feeling a strange satisfaction. It seems my meeting with the district attorney didn't go unnoticed. You were bluffing, Eden looked shocked. The feds couldn't. Not the Fed, I shook my head. Freya, Hazel's friend. She was supposed to hand over the evidence if I didn't show up for the meeting. Looks like she didn't let me down. Eden rushed to the table and grabbed a gun from the drawer. You ruined everything. My whole life, everything I've worked for. You ruined everything yourself, Eden, I replied calmly. The moment you decided that money was more important than human lives, more important than the life of your own daughter. Outside, voices could already be heard. Car doors slamming, commands coming over a megaphone. Everyone stay where you are, the house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Bellinger and the third man froze, exchanging panicked glances. Eden was still holding the gun pointed at me. This is the end, son. I looked at him without fear. You'd better give up. Don't make your situation worse. For a moment, something flashed in his eyes. Despair, anger, maybe even a glimmer of remorse. Then his hand with the gun dropped. "You always hated me," he said quietly. "You always thought I wasn't good enough." "No, Eden," I shook my head. "I loved you. I just couldn't accept your choices. And now it's too late to change anything." The office doors flew open. Police officers in bulletproof vests burst into the room, weapons at the ready. Behind them was a middle-aged woman with a determined expression on her face, whom I recognized from newspaper photos. Margaret Foster, the district attorney. "Everyone on the floor! Hands behind your heads!" the police officers shouted. Bellinger and the third man complied. Eden stood motionless, still clutching the gun. "Drop your weapon, now!" The officer pointed his rifle at him. Eden slowly looked up at me. His eyes showed a mixture of rage and defeat. "This isn't the end, Father," he said, and dropped the gun on the floor. The police immediately pinned him to the floor and handcuffed him. The same thing happened to Bellinger and the third man. Margaret Foster approached me. "Mr. Quincy, I received your materials. Impressive work." "It's my granddaughter's work," I replied. "I just finished what she started." "We'll need to take your statement and, of course, provide protection. These people have extensive connections." I nodded as I watched Eden and the others being led out of the room. "I'm willing to cooperate, for the sake of justice for Hazel." 2 months later, I stood at my granddaughter's grave. It was a quiet autumn morning, and the cemetery was empty. I placed a bouquet of white roses, her favorite flowers, on the mound of earth that was already beginning to grow over with grass. The trial of Nexron's management was still ongoing, but the outcome was a foregone conclusion. The evidence gathered by Hazel and supplemented by me was irrefutable. Eden confessed to involvement in the murder of his daughter, although he claimed he did not give a direct order for her death. He faced life imprisonment. Neuralex was withdrawn from the market. Thousands of victims of the drug received compensation. A loud scandal erupted, affecting the entire pharmaceutical industry and regulatory authorities. I kept my promise. I achieved justice for Hazel, but the bitterness of loss did not diminish. "You know," I said, addressing the grave as if Hazel could hear me, "your father asked if I always hated him. The truth is, I always loved him. I just couldn't accept who he had become. Somehow I lost him long before I lost you." The wind rustled softly in the trees as if responding to my words. "I don't visit him in prison," I continued. "I can't bring myself to. Maybe someday, but not now. The wound is too fresh." I ran my hand over the cold stone of the gravestone. "You would be proud of yourself, Hazel. Your investigation saved many lives. It prevented even more deaths. It's just a shame it couldn't save you." On the way back from the cemetery, I thought about how one decision, one turn, can change everything. Eden chose money and power over honesty and compassion. That choice cost his daughter her life and ruined his own. Hazel chose the truth, knowing it was dangerous, and that choice, although it led to her death, ultimately saved many lives. And me? I chose justice over a peaceful retirement. That choice cost me my son, but it gave dignity and meaning to my final years. Sometimes, in particularly difficult moments, I ask myself, was it worth it? But then I remember Hazel's face, bright, determined, full of life and principles, and I realized there was no other way. She deserved justice. All the victims of Neuralex deserved it. And although the price was high, I do not regret my choice. The toxic family ties are broken forever, but the truth has prevailed. And in this, however bitter, there is some consolation.